Oh my gosh. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. I was on Thursday's webinar and I was really upset because there weren't any questions. And then I realized I was on the Thursday one. So, oh my goodness, so many great questions. Um, well, hi, it's so good to be back. So I know some of you might have seen earlier in our posts, I was supposed to be here with Angela Jones, who is one of our wonderful Canadian therapists. Something came up, so it's just me flying solo tonight. So welcome everybody to our live Q&A NOCD webinars. My name is Jenna Overbaugh. I'm a therapist here at NOCD. I'm also the manager of community engagement. So you probably see me a lot on the in-app forum. You probably see me a lot on social media. So really good to be back and to hopefully answer some of your questions. So if you've never done this before, now is your opportunity to get some questions answered. I don't go in order. So if I didn't get to your question, that doesn't mean that I won't get to it. So I try to just find some that are helpful for people that I can answer without being reassurance. Okay. Let's just go with the first one. So this question is from Jason Ortega. How can journaling be of any help when there is a limited to no access to OCD specialists in the country you live in? Any particular method or system you could point out? So I think this brings to light a bigger question, and hopefully I'll answer your question within this, but I think journaling is fine. Coping skills are fine. I think it becomes an issue when you feel a reliance on this thing. So when you feel an over sense of reliance on having to journal, on like having to get it out, then I think that would be the I would want to know more so like what's the function of the journaling, right? So journaling is not inherently good. It's not inherently bad. Just like exercise is not inherently good, it's not inherently bad. It's kind of what's the function of that behavior. To what extent are you engaging in that behavior? Are you able to stop doing that behavior? Are you driving the ship when it comes to that? So regardless of whether it's journaling, meditation, listening to music, socializing, exercise, whatever, I would always bring it back to what's the function of that behavior. As far as journaling, sure, if that's something that helps you every once in a while to kind of ground yourself, that's great. But if it becomes something that's done repetitively that you feel like you have to do, that maybe there's a sense of urgency to do, regardless of whether it's journaling or something else, we would steer away from that because we wouldn't want it to become ritualistic. So that's my thoughts on that. And as far as like the limited access for OCD specialists, we say it now in a couple of different places. So OCD does now offer services in and out of the United States. So if you have any additional questions about that, feel free to reach out to the care team. Let them know kind of what country you're in, and we'll be able to determine whether we're able to help you in your country. So hopefully that answers your question, Jason. Usernames are stupid. So when suicide OCD is co-occurring with depressed mood, is there a higher risk of acting on the suicidal OCD? So for those of you who aren't aware, suicidal OCD is where someone might get really intrusive experiences. So intrusive thoughts, ideas, images, impulses, or feelings, or even urges to hurt themselves or to kill themselves. And they're experienced in an OCD sense, their experience is very ego dystonic. So ego dystonic means that they're inconsistent with their values. This is something that someone does not want to do. Having these suicidal OCD type experiences causes them anxiety versus kind of like this fantasy or curiosity type of experience, which would indicate that that's more ego syntonic. So absolutely, this is always a concern. Whenever someone is presenting with suicidal OCD and depressed mood, they can kind of play off of each other for sure. So Especially we see a lot of these things. We see a lot of like fearfulness around feeling depressed, and like panicking feelings. If you start to have more symptoms of depression, there might be a lot of panic symptoms like, oh my gosh, I woke up not feeling so great. What does that mean? Am I eventually going to get so depressed that I want to hurt myself? So just try to be really open with your therapist. It really comes down to, how are these thoughts making you feel? Like, what are your reactions to these thoughts? Is this something that you're kind of afraid of? Is this something that like your initial reaction is to like find all the reasons why you wouldn't do that to yourself, or to like self-assure you that you wouldn't do that to yourself? Or are you kind of going down that rabbit hole? Are you kind of wanting to entertain those thoughts a little bit more? And you might vacillate, right? Like it might one day be one, and another day it might be something different. So, but this is a common occurrence, especially when people are presenting with co-occurring depressive symptoms as well as suicidal OCD. So just talk to your therapist about it. Again, I would evaluate it more so of like, how do these thoughts make you feel? Like, what do these thoughts make you want to do? So on and so forth. Andrea, good evening. After practicing ERP for a while, when do your ritual or bad habits OCD has you believe get less challenging? I've gotten a lot better, but sometimes still give in to OCD. So yeah, my thoughts on this is that when it comes to OCD, we're never going to get rid of the O, because those are obsessions, right? Like we all have obsessions by definition. We've done lots of research to determine that everyone, no matter where you're at, no matter where you're from, even in the non-clinical population, people experience intrusive thoughts, ideas, images, impulses, urges, and feelings. So we're never going to get rid of the O, because that's a universal experience, right? So never going to get rid of those intrusive, distressing, repetitive experiences. And hopefully with ongoing ERP, we can turn down the noise on those things. Hopefully we can turn down the noise. We can make them less repetitive. We can make them less distressing. We can make them less vivid. And I don't think that we can get rid of the C either. I think that we all do things that are little quirks. Not to say that OCD is a quirk by any means, but I'm saying we all do things to cope. We all do things to regulate our anxiety. We all do things to kind of come back to a place of re-regulation. And so sometimes those things make sense. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's an over-reliance on those things. Sometimes it's fine. But I do think while we can't get rid of the O and we can't get rid of the C, I do think that we can get rid of the D, which is the disorder, right? So, Andrea, that's what I would encourage you to consider, right? That, every once in a while you might give into some things. And I don't think it's supposed to be perfection. I don't think that, like I said, we're ever going to get rid of the O. We're never going to get rid of the C. And I don't think that needs to be your mile marker. I don't think that needs to be like how you indicate that you're at the finish line. I don't think there's actually even a finish line for any of us. So yeah, you're going to give into it every once in a while. My advice is, as much as possible, try to treat OCD like an allergy versus like a diet. And what I mean by that is try to not give into it at all. Not that that's going to happen necessarily, but it's kind of one of those situations like aim for the star or aim for the moon. If you fail, then at least you'll hit the stars or land in the stars. So try to do it. Try to treat it and approach it like an allergy, like as though if you were to have even a little bit of it, bad reactions could follow. I think a lot of times, especially people in their recovery, they treat it almost like a diet. Like, I deserve it today. I've been working really hard, so I get a little bit of this ritual today, or, I'll just do a little bit and then I'll be fine. And that mentality, when it comes to rituals and compulsions, never, ever, ever ends up going well. So with practice, they've done tons of research to show that the one consistent correlation as far as like long-term maintenance goes and long-term ability to kind of maintain those gains in your recovery after treatment comes down to one factor, which is your ritual prevention. So according to the research, your ability to maintain those gains long-term after treatment doesn't matter as much about your therapist or the quality of therapy that you got. And it doesn't even matter about your subtypes or how severe you are. Doesn't matter even how many exposures you did. What matters most is your level and your consistency with ritual prevention, meaning how consistently and how much are you resisting your obsessive compulsive urges? How much and how consistently are you resisting your rituals? That's the most important thing. And that's backed by research. That's going to be the thing that is most highly correlated with your level of success kind of after treatment. So moral of the story, making sure that we are resisting rituals, making sure that we're super consistent in our application of that process. You can do all the exposures in the world. You can have the best therapist in the world. You can have the best treatment experience in the world. But if you are slipping back into doing your compulsions again, you're not going to be able to maintain that recovery. So just keep at it. Can definitely be discouraging to have been like relentless in resisting rituals, and every once in a while things come back, but treat it like treat those breakthrough symptoms like an opportunity to refine your skills. Try as much as possible, even though I totally get the discouraging nature of it. Try to take it as like, okay, this is another test. This is another test. I need to just refine my skills a little bit. Like, where am I? So that would be my advice. I'm just going down the list here. I usually don't do that, but Noah, how do you trust that you checked the faucet correctly? So Noah, I don't want you, well, I take that back. I do want you to trust that I do and I don't, right? So I'm going to go off of like two different tangents here. Trust is different from certainty, right? So when we say trust, when you say like, oh, I'm confident that I did, that's different from certainty, right? So trust to me is like at best 99.9% sure. There's still always going to be that little bit of uncertainty and like, I could be wrong. So I do want people to get to the point where they trust certain things, or they are confident in certain things, or they have faith in certain things, like in their religion, or they have faith in themselves, or they have faith in their relationship or whatever. But all of those concepts like trust and faith and confidence, they're all uncertain in and of themselves. So that's fine. My second tangent is I don't want you to trust that you checked the faucet correctly. I want you, especially in the beginning stages, I want you to lean into the uncertainty. I want you to go in the opposite direction. So whereas OCD is wanting you to be sure and to be certain and to get that 100%, I want you to think of it like the alphabet. And this could be relevant to the faucet. It could be relevant to checking compulsions. It could be relevant to anything. Think of it like the alphabet. Okay. So think of A, meaning like you're checking the faucet constantly. You want to be able to know 100%. You need to know 100% about that faucet, and you're checking it like crazy. That's A. At the other end of the spectrum is like being totally careless and not checking anything at all. You have no idea whether the faucet is checked or not. We want you to be able to be somewhere in the middle of the alphabet, right? We want you to be like MNO, kind of the middle sweet spot of the alphabet, where you can be okay. Like maybe I did, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but I'm really not gonna like go back and check. I'm gonna keep going with my life. In order for you to get to that MNO spot, we're gonna need to force you to like ST. So I'm not going to have you like turn your faucet on and then walk out of your house and see what happens. But I am going to have you turn your faucet on, maybe close your eyes and turn the faucet off, and not double check it, not do anything like that. I'm going to have you just walk away and see what happens, and try to do that repeatedly so that you can feel really uncertain and then maybe come back to the middle over time. So we start out having you lean into that uncertainty. We start out having you almost welcome that uncertainty and egg it on and do these exposures to elicit that discomfort. while you resist the ritual, with the intention that you are able to kind of settle back in that like confidence, faith, trust kind of area. But again, trust is not 100%. OCD is not trust. Trust is not enough for OCD. So just know that OCD always continues to raise the bar, right? So, you want to check one more time just to be sure, or just so that you can trust it. It's eventually going to be 2 more times and 3 more times and 4 more times. And eventually it's not enough. You ask someone else to have to do it for you. It's never enough for OCD. Let me see. Oh my gosh, this happens a lot. So Kaylee, I just started doing exposures and I feel like my OCD has gotten worse. What's happening? Kaylee, this is super normal. And it really stinks. Really stinks. But I want you to think of it this way. So I have a toddler. Okay. I have a 3.5-year-old. Let's assume that, and this is true, every time we go into Target, he's used to getting a toy. Every single time we go to Target, even if we go for paper towels or something quick, like he gets a toy. And now he's so used to that. Now we go to Target, we get a toy, except now it's generalized, right? Like now he can't even let us go to the gas station without getting a toy or some type of surprise, which is again, legit true story. And that's what OCD does too, right? It kind of generalizes and things snowball and things just get really out of control. So let's say that all of a sudden my husband and I have the conversation that due to money or just, trying to set boundaries with our child, we're not going to keep giving him toys every single time we go out to the store. He needs to learn that we go to the store and we don't always get a toy. So next time we go to the store, my husband and I are intent on not giving him a toy. My son doesn't know that. Why would he, right? Like he's used to what I've provided him this whole 3.5 years, which is this documentation that every single time we go to the store, you get a toy. My son doesn't know what I'm about to do. He doesn't know that it's not good to get a toy every time that you're at the store. He's only 3.5, and he only knows the information and the documentation that I provide him. So all of a sudden he asks for a toy. And again, why wouldn't he? This is the equivalent of you feeling anxious when you do this anxiety provoking thing. And so now all of a sudden I'm saying, no, honey, we're not getting any toys here. We're just here for this. And then we're going to go home. This is the equivalent of you not giving into your ritual. What's going to happen, right? The kid's going to freak out. He's going to not just ask more and more and more and more and more. He's going to continue to raise the bar, and have a full-on temper tantrum. And this happens. And it's not just an analogy. This is how we learn and unlearn and learn new behaviors. This is what happens in our brain. So it's not an analogy. It is literally called an extinction burst. So that's a fancy word for when you stop reinforcing a behavior that you've typically reinforced, you will temporarily see an increase in that negative behavior. So trying to give you guys another example. Think about it like even going through withdrawal of like a substance or something, although obviously that's way more physiological and medical of an issue, but same thing, right? So all of a sudden you stop drinking. Now all of a sudden you notice that everyone around you is drinking. It's kind of one of those things too, where, if you're looking for it, you're going to find it. So by starting exposures, you're also thinking of things a little bit differently. You're not just in like this kind of fleeting mode where you just do things and you're on autopilot, like feeling anxious, ritualizing, feeling anxious and ritualizing. You're thinking about things differently through a different lens and with a different frame of reference, which is awesome. But it's also going to bring your awareness and bring your attention to areas where maybe you weren't aware of it before. So between that, just being more vigilant for these things and being more aware of these things, in addition to the extinction burst, my advice is you have to stay the course. So would I be smart to give my child the toy at the peak of his temper tantrum? I mean, every behavior makes sense, right? But every behavior also has consequences. So the behavior of me giving him the toy has the benefit of stopping the temper tantrum. It also has the consequence of now I've set that precedent for myself and for my son. So next time we go to the store, now he knows that's the type of behavior that's going to get him the toy, right? So if you stay consistent in your ritual prevention, you do all these exposures and you resist more rituals and you resist the rituals and you stay the course, eventually that toddler is not going to freak out forever. Eventually that toddler is going to run out of steam, run out of energy, and it's going to be horrible. It's going to potentially feel really, really difficult. And you're going to want to give the kid the toy. You're going to want to just like get it over with, get it done with, question what you're doing in the first place. But I encourage you to think of the long term. I encourage you to think of like, I'm resisting rituals now so that it's easier later. And that's what I have to do when my son is freaking out in Target. I have to not give him what he wants then so that we can come back to Target later. It's all about the later, which is unfortunate because we're such instant gratification human beings. And ERP is not instant gratification. So totally normal. This is like par for the course. Just stay with it. Consider it an indicator that you're kind of rounding the corner. And that as long as you stay consistent in your ritual prevention, you'll see the other side of that soon. Okay. Do you think watching these webinars can be considered a compulsion? Anything can be considered a compulsion. So to determine whether something is a compulsion, I would encourage you guys to ask yourself, what's the function of this behavior? Why am I doing it? Am I doing it because I want to and it makes me feel good and I just feel like doing it right now? This is consistent with my values. Or do I feel like I have to do it? Like it's urgent. If I don't, something bad is going to happen. Ask yourself further, like what would happen if I didn't? Like if I didn't, would I be nervous that I lost information? Would I be nervous that I would relapse? Would I be nervous that I wouldn't get my question answered? Or would it be like, wouldn't be that big of a deal and kind of carry on like anything else? So by asking yourself those two questions, anything can become a ritual. Wearing this headband can become a ritual. Carrying bacon in your pocket can become a ritual. It literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it is. Ask yourself the function of that behavior. So why am I doing it? What would happen if I didn't do it? And that will give you a better indication of how you're doing with all of that. So how do you do exposures to POCD? So unfortunately, I don't know whether this means pure OCD or pedophilic OCD. So try to let me know in the chat. But either way, anytime someone asks me, how do you do exposures for this subtype? I really can't answer because it depends on you. It depends on you and your unique fears. So even if this meant pedophilic OCD, so people who have obsessions and compulsions around this fear of being a pedophile, it totally depends. One person could be really worried about becoming a pedophile and like being around children in swimsuits. Another person could be worried about someone else maybe doing that to their child. Speaking of children, you can probably hear mine in the background. So another better example, trying to become less distracted. Let's say two people had harm OCD, right? Let's say two people had harm OCD. One person with harm OCD could be fearful that they are going to punch somebody. And they might, do exposures around their coworkers. They're really fearful that their coworker, that all of a sudden they're just like in a meeting going to punch one of their coworkers. They might have to do exposures for that. Let's say someone else is fearful of like stabbing their baby, hurting their baby when they're alone. The exposure to like punch a pillow is going to be difficult for one person. It's not going to be difficult for the other person, but they both have harm OCD. So I get this. This is probably the most common question that I get. How do you do exposures to whatever subtype? And it doesn't, we can't answer that question. It totally depends on your unique triggers. Ask yourself, what are your triggers? How does it make you feel on a scale of 0 to 10? Like, how difficult is that for you? And ask yourself, what are your rituals? What rituals do you do before, during, and after that triggering situation? And then ask yourself, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, how difficult would it be for me to do this, to approach this trigger without this ritual? How difficult would it be for me to look at a picture of children in bathing suits, say at a department store, in a department store magazine? How difficult would it be for me to hold a butter knife next to my baby without my husband having to like give me reassurance over my shoulder or something like that? So again, two people with the same exact theme, same exact subtype could have two totally different exposure hierarchies. If it was that easy to just create like, oh, here's a harm OCD exposure hierarchy, here's a exposure hierarchy for contamination OCD, like we wouldn't need therapists, right? There's an art to it. There's also a science to it, just being very particular about that person. So you have to do way more functional analysis about what it is that you're triggered by. What are the rituals that you're doing, all those things. So totally depends on your unique situation. I'm trying to find some good ones. How do I change counselors? So this is just really simple. And I'm assuming that this person is with NOCD, potentially not. So Ashley or anyone else out there, if you're at NOCD and you would like to change counselors, you can try reaching out to your peer advisor. So we have like Kyle, Molly, there are a couple other ones. So feel free to reach out to your peer advisor. You could also just reach out to the care team and let them know that you have some concerns about that. So they can be accessed at care@nocdhelp.com. That's CARE@nocdhelp.com. You can always too reach out to us on Instagram at treatmyocd. If somehow you can't get a hold of somebody, we'll try to help you out however we can. So you do have the right to change your counselors, and that's something that we do often. We sometimes it's just not a good fit. And to try to give people the best experience possible and the best chance possible for success, we definitely are open to transfers at NOCD. I can't speak to anywhere else, but so Wes, today I had a moment that I did a compulsion and started going down the rabbit hole of compulsions. I couldn't get out of my own head. What comes to mind here is an analogy that I typically use is to describe mental compulsions. So to me, especially mental compulsions like rumination, but really other compulsions too, I think of them like trains. When you've just started, when it doesn't have a whole lot of velocity or a whole lot of momentum, they're a lot easier to reroute and to just become aware of them and try to redirect it to, I'm not answering that question right now. There's no way that I can know that information. I'm letting that go. That's an example of what you could say or how you could enact like non-engagement strategies with a rumination. Whereas similar to a train, if something's been really invested in, if a rumination or a compulsion's been really invested in, you've been really thinking about it pretty deeply and, analyzing it pretty thoroughly, you've been doing it for maybe 2 or 3 hours, it's like a train that has a lot of velocity. It has a lot of momentum behind it, and it's going to be hard to stop. So think of it that way. My best piece of advice when it comes to this difficult scenario is to just be as vigilant as possible, to try to catch that rumination as early as you possibly can so that you can treat that like a train. It's going to be a lot easier to kind of bring back to the station, or i.e. whatever your present moment is, kind of whatever it is that you're evaluating, whatever interests you at that moment, versus if it had been going for several hours. So next time, just try to be a little bit more vigilant for it. And it's always going to feel uncomfortable. You're always going to feel that pull to keep ruminating. You're always going to feel that pull to justify that behavior. You're always going to feel that pull to, if I just think about it a little bit more, then I'll be done. Or if I just think about it a little bit more, I'll be able to move on. Or I need to keep thinking about it. I'm so close, or so important. And I think it's just, I wanted to ruminate about something. I made a mistake at work earlier. And I did something a little bit embarrassing that potentially could have gotten me in trouble. And I wanted to like think about all these different scenarios so badly, like how this could have been interpreted, and thinking of the worst case scenario, probably thinking of the best case scenario. And it's like, there's literally no way that I can figure that out. Like, the most certain that I can ever be with that situation is where I'm at right now, which is not certain at all. Like, thinking and thinking and thinking about this is only going to make me more miserable and more unsure. And I don't feel like spending the next 4 hours of my night on this. And it felt uncomfortable. It felt like I was being ignorant, like that I was missing something, or I was letting something go that was really important. It felt like a signal, and I chose to treat it like noise. And hopefully in the future, when I make that mistake again, because mistakes happen, I don't respond with such a sense of urgency, that I'm able to be a little bit more compassionate with myself. So it's going to feel hard. It's going to feel like a signal. You have to treat it like noise, and you have to take the chance that it's a signal, but treat it like noise anyway. So I believe OCD peers, where can we find peer groups for 13-year-olds? I believe OCDpeers.com has peer groups. I also believe that Hardquark has peer groups. NOCD has peer support groups also for NOCD members. So if you are interested in support groups, you can definitely become a member, and that's something that you get as part of your experience being a member. So otherwise, I would encourage you to check out Hardquark and or OCD peers. And yes, you basically have to set boundaries with the OCD. I think of the energy that I would want someone to have is setting like very clear boundaries with like a puppy. Dr. Reed Wilson, who is amazing, and he's kind of a pioneer in the OCD world. I think of it like if a puppy came up and you just got a new puppy, and he was chewing on your wood desk or whatever, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's strange. I don't know why he's doing that right now. You'd be like, no, we're not doing that right now. Absolutely not. Enough. Like, you cannot do that anymore. My hope is that everybody can get to that level of confidence and power, and kind of talking back to their OCD, and kind of setting those really, really firm boundaries. Like, no, absolutely not. I'm not going there. Absolutely not. So yeah, just setting really, really clear boundaries, setting boundaries, and then making sure that you maintain those boundaries. What advice do you have for someone who's working through ERP but is still dealing with anxiety and shame around it all? So I think the anxiety piece and the shame piece, I think, is going to take some time. Keep in mind, these are messages that you've given your brain, for better or for worse. And all behavior, like I said, serves a function, right? So not that they're good or bad, but they serve a function, but they also have consequences. So these rituals, by doing these rituals, you've been giving your brain certain messages. You've been giving your brain certain messages that this thing is threatening, this thing is threatening, this thing is threatening. You can't tolerate this. And we've laid down a pretty thorough and pretty thick and kind of steady neural network to establish that the world is scary, that you can't tolerate it, that you can't handle difficult things. And in come these ERP specialists and this OCD person, this OCD specialist here, who's saying that we need you to try to start doing the opposite of that. We need you to start approaching your fears and resisting your compulsions. And that can be a really scary place. Can be a really scary place for your brain, because your brain your amygdala, which operates solely to keep you alive and to register things as threat or non-threat, your amygdala is not very trusting of you. So it always will err on the side of caution. So you have to realize, like, your brain, your amygdala doesn't realize that you have OCD. It only keeps a record of what you've taught it over time. So it's been taught for a very long time and pretty consistently that the world is scary, this is threatening, and I can't tolerate it. So now you've been doing exposures, you've been really committing to your treatment, which is awesome, but your brain's not on board yet. Your brain is kind of like, you might be singing a different tune now, but it's been different your whole life. Like, you've been telling me something different for many, many years. My job is to keep you safe. So I'm erring on the side of caution, even though you're resisting this ritual and trying to give me the message that this thing is no longer threatening. I'm not on board yet. I'm going to release epinephrine just in case. And that's why you can still feel all those physiological and kind of mental, sensations accompany anxiety. And it can last for a long time. You need to commit to it and be patient enough to allow yourself to lay down those new neural networks, that the world is not necessarily a threatening place, and that your feared events aren't as probable to happen as your OCD thinks it is. And, that God forbid something does happen, that you can tolerate it and you will figure it out. But it's going to take a while to get there. And as far as the shame piece, it sounds super cliche, and I was not someone who would typically, like, as readily kind of advise this, because it's hard for me to do. I would encourage you all to check out Kimberly Quinlan's self-compassion book for OCD. I actually have it right here. And she was on, I think, our webinar last week for for OCD Awareness Week. So this is Kimberly Quinlan's the self-compassion workbook for OCD. Again, it's Kimberly Quinlan. You can find it on Amazon. She has a ton of resources on her Instagram as well. And I like it because there's a lot of, like, actual where you can write and work through things as a legitimate workbook. And, she says, or has said before, I'm not sure where I got it, either from her Instagram or from here, but that self-compassion is kind of the antidote to shame and guilt, especially that which we feel as a result of our OCD. So, self-compassion is essentially just treating ourselves the way that we would treat another loved one. It's really easy for us to be compassionate about someone else. So Jen, I would wonder, like, what advice you would give a friend, or how you would treat a friend, right? How you would talk to them. It's probably not how you would talk to yourself. So self-compassion is really, truly a skill. It's something that you need to learn. It's not just something that you do when you feel better. You really need to work through it and work on it. So when it comes to shame and guilt, I would always kind of refer someone back to Kimberly Quinlan's material. All right, I'm going to take 2 more questions. 2 more questions, and then I gotta go put my kiddo to bed. So, if someone has OCD and generalized anxiety disorder, will the treatment be the same for the GAD part? So this is one of my passion topics. I love this question. I did a big webinar through NOCD on it. And it's one of my favorite topics. Oh my gosh, I could make this a whole webinar in and of itself. But essentially, yes, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, these are separate diagnoses. They are separate from each other. A lot of people, though, in the field, a lot of OCD professionals are under the assumption that doesn't matter as much, and that we wish that they weren't separate. So even if you were to look at the diagnostic criteria, or like a diagnostic screener for the questions that we have to ask for OCD versus GAD, it's almost laughable, the overlap. It's almost ridiculous. It's kind of like, I don't know, like I really get tripped up on kind of what would be a slam dunk OCD case versus what would be like a slam dunk GAD case, and not the other way. So they are separate diagnoses. instead of them being separate, I would really like for them to exist almost on a spectrum. And I don't know what that spectrum would be, but I've played around with two different ideas. I want to say, honestly, with the main function and the main characteristic being anxiety and a dysfunctional relationship with anxiety and intolerance of uncertainty and all these compulsions slash safety behaviors. Generalized anxiety disorder is obviously going to be way more general. I think of generalized anxiety disorder as kind of that like rolling storm in the background. It's like not super, super threatening. You can still kind of manage throughout the day, but it's like always just there. And it's kind of just always there, like lingering and looming in the background. Whereas OCD, I feel like, is experienced more as like that thunderbolt, like that lightning strike that can be very, very sudden and quick and hit you out of nowhere and just very intense. Now, that's not to say that OCD can't also kind of be lingering in the background like a rolling storm. It's not to say that GAD can't also be very, very intense. But the way that I would like to see it, I would like to see them on a spectrum of maybe like the level of creativity, like more down to earth, relatable, like real life fears. In GAD, like finances, performance in school or work, the health of everyone around them and themselves, just general bad things happening in the world. And then we have OCD, which can have obviously a much more creative flair to it. Like if I don't do this 8 times, my mom is going to die. So yeah, but the treatment is largely the same. So the treatment will always come down to an element of exposure and response prevention. So exposure and response prevention is the gold standard treatment for OCD and anxiety related conditions, including generalized anxiety disorder. So even with generalized anxiety disorder, I think instead of having the diagnoses, I would want to, as a clinician and as a professional, I would ask, what are the function of these behaviors? What are the safety behaviors that someone does in generalized anxiety disorder? Is it avoidance? Is it self-assurance? Is it over-reliance on coping skills? So on and so forth. And for OCD, obviously, would be the same. So yeah, the treatment is largely going to be the same. I think in general, with generalized anxiety disorder, you'll get more of that cognitive therapy. Like you'll get a little bit more of that, like thought challenging, so on and so forth. I'm not a fan of that. I think that's dangerous. I'm a fan of educating about the thought errors that can happen in OCD and GAD. I'm a fan of saying that OCD and anxiety both tend to overpredict negative things happening. OCD and anxiety tend to both have you overestimate the probability of something bad happening, have you catastrophize. But I don't like getting into the specifics of, are you catastrophizing right now? I would rather have that person learn through experience. Because I think that when it comes to anxiety, experience is necessary. I don't think that it's enough to just talk through it. I don't think it's enough to just challenge that anxiety in the moment. I think it's really necessary to have the behavioral element as well. And yes, they do overlap a lot. What we are seeing more and more so in the just kind of research and what we see just in our own experience as clinicians, we're seeing that a lot of times people who present as, we see a lot of people presenting and they have OCD, but they've kind of always been like an anxious person. Like I've always been an anxious person, or they definitely, they've had GAD before. So it does tend to be one of these phenomenons where people maybe started out having more generalized anxiety disorder. They started out kind of having these more generalized fears about just bad things in general happening. And then all of a sudden it can turn into a little bit more creative. And the alarm button tends to go up a little bit more. All right, one more question. And yes, oh my gosh, OCD Doodles by Laura is amazing. OCD Doodles on Instagram is wonderful. I like this one. Is there a reason why dealing with OCD pertaining to your health, you begin to have physical problems, symptoms as it pertains to that fear of illness? Yes. So if I were to sit here and talk to you guys about lice, probably within 10 or 15 minutes, I show you guys pictures of lice. I talk about lice. I show you videos and sounds of lice. You'd probably all at some point start scratching your head. It's just our bodies are really imaginative, and our bodies kind of do these things that are just strange and can't really explain it. And then the other piece is that I think it's also a confirmation bias. So, the long story short of confirmation bias is that we all have this bias that when you're looking for something, you'll find it. So if I had all of you between now and tomorrow count all of the blue Jeeps that you found on the street, every single blue Jeep that you find, I want you to count it. You'd probably find a lot of blue Jeeps, but it's no more blue Jeeps or no fewer blue Jeeps than you've ever seen before. It's just that you weren't really looking for them before. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing so many blue Jeeps. They were always there. It's just that you weren't necessarily paying attention to it. So I think that can definitely happen when it comes to physical symptoms, right? So if I were to scan my body right now, I have an itch in my ear. I kind of have to pee. My back hurts. My mouth is really dry. Like if I'm looking for things, I'm going to find them, right? So versus I didn't really notice any of those uncomfortable sensations because until I brought my awareness to them and my attention to them, because I was so focused on what was in front of me, which is this webinar. So the point is that you are always going to have these uncomfortable sensations. You're especially going to have more of those sensations when you obsess on them and when you do a lot of compulsions around them. Back to the lice example, you can kind of almost create those sensations and create those experiences. And especially when you're looking for something, you will find more of it. So I hope that was all really, really helpful. My gosh, I could stay on here forever and answer questions. I have to come back one of these days. I will be back one of these days. I'll be back in a couple weeks with one of our advocates to talk more. I wish you all the best of luck in your recovery. We have Dr. McGrath coming on tomorrow. We have Jackie Chapin coming on Thursday. So she's a therapist. You might know her as Jackie Chapin Therapy on Instagram. So she'll be back too. We have lots of wonderful people coming back to answer your questions in the future. So come back, keep getting your questions answered. You can find us on Instagram at treatmyocd. And I hope to see you all again some other time. Thank you guys. See ya.